I want to talk about a story that sounds fake when you first hear it. It sounds like something that came from a Reddit thread, got exaggerated, and slowly turned into an urban legend. But this one didn't start as fiction, and the more you dig into it, the more uncomfortable it gets. Not because it's scary, but because it's real. In the early 1980s, there were arcade machines in the United States that could display real missing children posters directly on the screen. Not as part of the game, not as a special event, just quietly built in. This came back to light decades later when people started restoring old arcade cabinets. Collectors, hobbyists, and preservation groups began dumping ROMs, testing hidden modes, and documenting things that were never meant to be seen by players. And that's when people started noticing something strange. On certain machines, if you left them idle long enough or flipped a specific internal DIP switch, the attract mode would suddenly change. Instead of showing gameplay footage or a high-score screen, the cabinet would display a black and white photograph of a child, along with their name, their date of birth, and the word missing. No animation, no sound, no explanation, just a static image sitting there in the middle of an arcade. The machine most closely associated with this is an early 1980s arcade game called Mini Golf, released by a company named Senti Technologies. On the surface, there's nothing unusual about it. It's bright, cartoonish, family-friendly, exactly the kind of game you'd see in a mall arcade or a bowling alley. But buried inside the software was a feature most players never encountered, and many arcade owners didn't even know it existed. That's an important detail. This wasn't something that popped up all the time. In most cases, operators disabled it. In other cases, they simply never enabled it, which explains why thousands of people played these machines in the 80s and never saw the missing children screens, while a small number of people did and remembered it vividly. So where did this idea even come from? In the late 1970s and early 1980s, the United States was in the middle of what was essentially a national panic about missing children. High-profile cases dominated the news. Milk carton printed missing kids' faces, school ran awareness programs. There was a growing belief that exposure mattered, that if enough people saw a child's face, someone might recognize them. And arcades were everywhere. They weren't niche, they weren't gamer spaces. They were packed with kids, teenagers, parents, and families. So someone had an idea. Why not use arcade screens the same way milk cartons were being used? This is where organizations like Vocal come in, the Video Operators Children Alert Line. Vocal worked with arcade operators to distribute missing children informations in places where large numbers of people gathered. The arcade industry at least briefly went along with it. So some manufacturers quietly included missing children displays inside their machines, not as a selling point, not as a feature anyone advertised, just there if enabled. And this is where things start to feel unsettling, because arcades weren't serious places. They were loud, chaotic, overstimulating. So imagine being a kid in the early 80s, you walk past rows of flashing screens, you hear sound effects overlapping, you're focused on games, and then one cabinet, just one, isn't doing that. It's silent, and instead of a cartoon character, it's showing a real child who disappeared. No context, no warning, just the implication. People who saw these screens as kids describe it as confusing more than frightening. They didn't understand why it was there. Some thought it was part of the game, others thought the machine was broken. Some didn't even fully understand what missing meant. It just felt wrong, like something serious had slipped into a place it didn't belong. Another detail that makes this harder to shake is that the posters were never updated. The children displayed were real cases from that specific time period. Some of those kids were eventually found, some were not. But the machines didn't change. So decades later, when collectors powered these cabinets back on, the screens were still there, showing children who had either been found long ago or had been missing for 40 years, frozen in time, still labeled missing. That's when people started asking harder questions. Why were these specific children chosen? Why only 6? Why wasn't there documentation? Why didn't the arcade industry talk about this more openly? And the answer, as frustrating as it is, seems to be that nobody thought about the long-term implications. This wasn't designed to be preserved. It wasn't meant to last decades. It was a short-term awareness effort embedded into hardware that outlived its context. Once missing children campaigns shifted away from arcades, the feature was simply forgotten, not removed, not archived, just ignored. That silence is what makes the story unsettling. Not because it suggests anything sinister, but because it shows how casually real tragedy was integrated into entertainment. No guidelines, no expiration date, just the assumption that someone, somewhere would turn it off. Over time, theories started to grow online. Some people believe arcade operators disabled the feature because parents complained. Others think manufacturers downplayed it because it made machines less appealing. There are also theories that this was an early experiment in public messaging, testing whether people pay attention when something real interrupts something fun. There's no evidence it was anything darker than that, but the lack of transparency leaves room for speculation. What's especially unsettling is how few records exist. There's no official list of which cabinets had the feature, no clear explanation of how often it was used, no documentation of whether it helped solve any cases beyond anecdotal reports. For something involving real missing children, it vanished from history surprisingly easily. And maybe that's the most disturbing part, not the images, not the arcades, but how easily something like that can disappear from collective memory. Entirely real, entirely documented, and yet forgotten until something stumbles across it decades later and says, wait, why is this here? This story isn't about fear, it's about context. When you take something tragic and remove the explanation, the intention, and the time period, all that's left is discomfort. A face on a screen, a name, and the knowledge that at some point people hoped this might help. For a brief moment in history, arcade games weren't just entertainment, they were bulletin boards, public service announcements, and unintentional memorials. Not loudly, not proudly, just quietly looping in the background. And the reason this story sticks with people today isn't because it's creepy, it's because it reminds us that technology doesn't forget, even when people do. Those kids are still there, still staring out from a screen, waiting for a moment that already passed.